right, we can go ahead and get started. This session's on glue people. Let's start with what is a glue person?
What is a glue person? So whatever your imagination is telling you right now should probably stop because it doesn't look good. But a glue person is within an organization, they exist and it's not really known what title they have. The role they often play is they create a bridge between all the communication that happens in a team. So you've got some teams that work in design, some people that work in tech, some people work in business, a lot of information floating around. The glue people are the ones that ensure the information is cohesive and is being transferred to the right people. So if you've got some developers that need to work on something, they need a bunch of information to do that. That information comes from a bunch of rambling and requirements and so on that turn into specifications. There's a shepherding of that information to flow it from this high level rambling and so on into cohesive specifications that the team can execute on, that the developers can work on. The glue people play an essential role in that information shepherding. And in the past, everyone was more located in the same room, and so information flow was easier. The need for glue people has grown as we've got distributed teams and distributed tools because the information is spread everywhere. So somebody has to put all that information back together again to make it cohesive. And high quality teams are the ones driven by high quality, high bandwidth information. So the glue people are the ones that ultimately glue the information together. So what does that look like? It could be an index page on a Google Doc or a wiki page. It could be I've seen spreadsheets, I've seen Jira tickets, I've seen Miro boards, all of these acting as a sort of a single place where they start to glue all the information together. They might bring in some sequence diagrams, they might bring in some use cases, they might bring in some images, some user experience, and they put it all into one place, ultimately to get into a task that the development team can take and then run with. And so those are the glue people that I'm talking about. And that's the function that they often take.
Awesome. And it sounds like they're not just tech, they're not just business. So like, how do you go about finding them when you're getting started with a project?
Yeah, they're the ones. To find them, you got to find, first of all, who's filling in your Jira tickets. How is the work getting to the developers? And are those tickets the source of truth for the development team or linear tasks or wherever your creation, like your task creation system is? Who's ultimately responsible for making sure the information is ready on there? Now, that doesn't mean the person who writes the tickets. Sometimes that could be a scrum master that is just saying, okay, I'm just going to scribe whatever I'm being told. So it's not necessarily the person that writes the ticket, but it's whoever collected all the information in the first place to go onto that ticket. That's your glue person. So who do they can come from any role. They can be business facing, they can be a product person. I haven't seen that many user experience people that are that, but there are that. I'm sure they're out there. I do recall one person that was from the UX space that cared a lot about that information, but whether they were the glue person, I couldn't tell you for sure. But certainly I've seen it as product people. Product people can be that. They're usually inbound PMs. So that is, those are product people that work directly with their tech team. But more often than not, it is your technical project managers or coding architects, highly social technical people. These tend to be your glue people. Because the reason that is, just to elaborate on that a little bit, is because they have enough understanding of what's needed at the lowest levels to be able to provide the bridge to the information, right? Like they have to know that person A and person B doing development need this particular architecture document for them to keep working, in addition to the business requirement, in addition to these user experience screen that they need. When you think of like the business design and tech artifacts required to go into delivery, somebody needs to have a decent grasp on all three of these concepts. So most of the time, because it has a technical aspect, it's technical people that need to do it, but not always. Like you do get some product people that are highly technical. You get some business people, like business analysts, that are highly technical. And so it's whoever has a grasp on all three of those areas, design, business, and tech. They're usually the people that automatically become glue people.
And then because we're looking at NDD, what's their role in NDD?
Yeah, so narrative driven does exactly that. It creates three lanes for you to do design, business, and tech. And so I'm going to quickly flip over to a screen to show that, what that looks like, just so that we can see it. And so here, if I show, here's a narrative. And we start with an outcome that user should receive an email with the discount code. And then we start talking about the business context here and say user receives the code. And now we're talking about the interface that occurs. So this will be through their email client. And then we can talk about the system that will send this email to the user in the first place. Email with code is sent. And without going into too much detail about the NDD process, so you can look at other content that we've got towards that. But what you can see here is we've got an interaction lane, context lane, and system lane. And those are the three things that we're talking about Glue people do. They bring in the information from these three different disciplines into a single cohesive space. And so that's why they're essential here. Somebody needs to be the network initiator, like the 0 to 1. So if you want everybody to come here and collaborate, there needs to be something that starts that collaboration off. It's a multi-sided network of design, business, and technology folks. And if you're going to have something that acts as the source of truth, as narratives do, then you need someone to start that network and then push for that network to be maintained. And so that's why it makes sense for Glue people to be the people that do that, because they do have an understanding of all the three disciplines. They can bring in people from the three different disciplines and they can bring them into the conversation and have a shared understanding in one place. That they create a shared understanding.
Is there like a great story, Sam? Just I'm thinking about this because I know the people you're describing, and I've seen in many projects where sometimes it's surprisingly also a person who's been there a while. They know where the skeletons are, for example. I've been in sessions where it's like, oh, did you know that we've already done this in the past? And there's a whole bunch of information. When we tried this 3 years ago with a prior team, I don't know if you have any examples that might be fun to describe here with narrative or even domain-driven design. Because as you think about, this is just one narrative, but sometimes you want to have boundaries for the other parts of the system.
Yeah, absolutely. The examples I've seen, and I wish I could share that example with you right now, but let's just say it's for a large gaming organization, and Miro boards were being used as an index. And the amount of information that they had to portray basically filled the board with so much information that it was difficult to actually keep track of it all, right? And I'm not sure if that's answering the specific example that you wanted. What was the example, sorry, that you wanted?
I was just thinking about interesting stories about this. I think what you're talking about is we all have had the Miroverse.
Yep. So one thing that's interesting, I spoke to someone I'm not sure if I can mention names here. Let's say it's somebody from Airbnb. So I spoke to someone there, and they use Figma to create these index pages, and in addition to an Excel sheet. And as soon as the Figma designs change, they throw away the spreadsheets and start brand new index pages. And it's a lot of overhead, but these index people are continuing to double down on creating these index pages so that they can keep the team aligned. Because without those, you've got this highly volatile world of how the requirements are changing in Figma, but the team needs to keep up. And so if you don't have this glue person in the middle keeping that information in sync, the dev team's going to be lost. Right. And then this is an organization, I happen to know Airbnb is heavily design centric, like they're design first company. You've got tech first companies, you've got business first companies, and you've got design first companies, all of them needing some way to ensure the information is portrayed to the development team that's ultimately going to deliver the work.
In the concept of NDD, are you expecting Glue people are the ones that are facilitating, or are they more of a SME that you're talking to?
It's a great question. Either or. So if you can be the glue person, and we've seen this right now with technical architect style, coding architect persona, that is putting together the narratives asynchronously. So they're creating the narratives, they're being the glue person in that they're creating the narratives. And then they are inviting other people to come and run the session. And in that session, the collaboration happens, but they're not the facilitator. So it's not always the case that the glue person has to be the facilitator, but they pull in the facilitator. Like the facilitator just has to have the gift of the gab, right? They need to be a good talker. They need to know how to corral people and work with people. That's a different skill to being the glue, like the person that understands all the information and how it works across the three different disciplines. However, oftentimes those same glue people tend to be very social. Not always, but they do tend to be social. And so they're a fantastic candidate for actually running the sessions as well.
I also have a sense that being a facilitator for this might create more glue people, or even being in the sessions has a potential to create more glue people. Would you agree with that? Have you seen that?
It might, we haven't seen that yet, to tell you the truth, but it might, I can foresee that happening, that somebody who is, you know, confident in their understanding across the three disciplines, but doesn't really have a method yet to do it. Let's rewind back a little bit first. For a glue person to have become a glue person in the first place, they went through the journey of understanding the three different disciplines: design, business, tech. They saw enough of working with design people, the screenshots that coming in, or the API designs coming in, or whatever the interface is. But they've had some interaction with the experience layer. They've had interaction with the business folks enough that they've gathered an understanding. And then they realize the gap in the information transfer. And so they create some kind of index of their own. And the fact that there are so many index styles like Miro, spreadsheets, wikis, documents, tickets, means that it's not standardized. And so there's no standardized way to do that. So now that you've got somebody on the rise that is understanding the three different disciplines, they see that, hey, there's this narrative approach that actually allows me to take my understanding further in a standardized way to create glue. Will then create a glue person. So I can see that journey happening. I can't say we've witnessed it yet because it's still too early in our NDD journey.
And then if you can't find your glue people, or if you come into an org and there's not one, can you manufacture it? Is there a way to piece it together?
Yeah, I think so. Just building on what I just said with the client we're working on right now, like it was actually, there was a high order glue person as a VP of engineering, right? So he saw this whole NDD stuff and was like, hey, this is great. Like we should do this. And so there's different levels of glue people. There's glue people, this high level of saying, I would like this. I know that this is a good thing for information. Typically, higher level folks are going to be in charge more of structuring teams and assigning things to different people. And so they can act as a glue person in designing the organization and designing the teams and designing the interactions to increase flow of information. That's one kind of a glue person, because you're designing how the information flows. And then there are the people who are actually creating the narratives themselves. And so can you manufacture one? Yes, by being someone who designs the system in a way that says, look, we need to have high bandwidth communication. We need to make sure these three disciplines are working together. So let's design the system as such. And hey, person X, you seem to know a lot about these things. You're an up and coming glue person. Let's get you using narratives to do so. And now you've manufactured one. And of course, you can go read the content we're creating. You can come watch these sessions. You can come talk to us. And that's how you then become a better glue person.
Awesome. I think that's the high level bit. So I thought we'd go into tips a little bit for folks that are using these practically. So I know you mentioned the index documents, and specifically, I cannot imagine throwing everything away and starting over every time. But can you talk about how, like, some better options for that? I know narrative obviously is a big one, but even just a central repo of information just seems like it would be superior.
Yeah, sure. It's always being thrown away, especially if you're using tickets or epics and so on, because by virtue of what they are, they're ephemeral. Once you say done, they disappear and everything you've created goes into the done cemetery. So the antidote to that is to just change the way you think about your requirements are not ephemeral. The requirements should actually be long-lived, right? The requirements and the specifications are things that you defined and they should be long-lived. The task and the work to do and fulfill the requirements, that is ephemeral, right? So when you think of the words project, epic, ticket, task, these have a finite life cycle. They have a beginning and an end, and then they're gone. The requirements, on the other hand, are once they're in production, they're still requirements. They're still there, and the specifications to the solution that created them is still there. So you don't want to throw that away. You want to keep that. When you think about what is kept and what is thrown away, that is really the question in terms of, is an index page worth it versus is a requirement worth keeping? There's some nuances here, and I'm just trying to pick those apart. You've got the concept of tasks, you have the concept of indexing and linking information, and then you have the concept of your requirements and your specifications. So three distinct things. And unfortunately, a ticket combines all those three into one to everyone's detriment. And so what you the way you want to think about that is when you're thinking about creating a narrative or even a requirement, like state your requirement with the premise that this is a long-lived thing. When you create your solution definition, know that's also a long-lived artifact. And the specifications that follow from the solution, they're all long-lived. So once you can think that all of these are long-lived, narrative obviously gives you a great way to put that all together. But even if you're doing this in separate artifacts of some kind, consider that those things are long-lived and you want to come back and evolve these continuously, right? That's one side. Separately, the linking of information would be creating references between this piece of requirement and this piece of work that is being carried out to finish it, such as a task or a ticket or whatever that is. So now that ticket can go through the to-do, doing, done, back into QA and back and forth and whatever, and then it can die, right? And then it can be removed from the initial artifact where it said this was in progress and now it's complete and in production. The specification of something can be in production. Your requirement and the solution to that requirement can be in production, and changes to that. There's a life cycle here as well. There's a change life cycle to your requirements and your systems that follow. So those are, you can track the status of that using ephemeral tickets, but at the end of the day, you want to keep your specs and your requirements. That's how, if you change your thinking to be about those three and separate those three things, right? The tasks versus the requirements. Therefore, the index page in the middle is ephemeral and it lives next to the tickets, but you keep your requirements. And so, of course, as the proprietary as the team that created NDD, heavily biased to say that's exactly what narratives are solving, right? It's doing exactly that. It's giving you a standardized way to do what I just said.
That is a whole nother topic that we should do, is the like what to keep and what to throw away and sorting everything out, especially for folks that are existing with the current project and are trying to maintain all of those separate sources of truth right now. And
it only took 15 years of thinking and working on it to come up with that. So
yeah. I have a kind of an interesting one here. So we're talking a lot about people that are looking for glue people or finding glue people. If someone's watching this and they're like, oh, I'm the glue person, do you have any advice for them for finding all of the other people that they need or bringing everything together?
Yes, start with outcomes. Always start with the business outcome. Laser focus on the business outcome because nothing else matters. What is it we're trying to achieve? I think that's often lost. Even for glue people, it's easy to get lost in the labyrinth of enterprise wins, right? I don't know if that's even a right metaphor, but you know what I mean? There's a lot of change in the enterprise and you can lose the plot in terms of what's actually valuable. And so keep asking the question, keep going back to what's the business value we're trying to achieve and what's the priority of the business values that we want to get done, because that will ultimately drive everything else. If you have your outcomes defined in a prioritized list, which is, you know, the very basics of Agile that started in 2001 to keep a high focus on delivering value, then if you start with the premise of what are the outcomes we're trying to achieve, and then you focus on who do I need to ensure that outcome happens. So now you have that information. You, as a glue person, if you understand the three disciplines, what's going to be required from who in order to achieve that value. So rather than start with tickets, rather than start with breaking down the work into tickets, start with understanding the outcome and breaking down the deliverables for that outcome before you create a single ticket. And also how those deliverables are going to work together to achieve the outcome. Right? So this is when in narrative, we created the time-based modeling approach for requirements, because if you have your moments over time and you have your front-end component, back-end component, business context, back-end component, front-end component, you've sequenced them in time to achieve a specific outcome, right? And so that's the superpower here, and that's the change in the way you might work, right? Like traditionally, you weren't time-based. As a glue person, you would think of the world in a static snapshot. And what I mean by that is you'd look at the requirement, you'd say, okay, we need these 12 different modules to do that. You might work with the architecture team, you might work with the design team, and you piece together the different modules, and you might draw a big map of all the modules that are needed and then create a bunch of tasks out of that. But that's not outcome focused. That's totality static focused, right? And so what you want to do instead is to slice that, to do value slices, which is the essence of value stream mapping and user story mapping and a bunch of those practices. You want to introduce time. And when you start with an outcome and you work backwards from an outcome and you say, well, what are the things I need to do in order to achieve that outcome? And then you piece together the modules needed to come together. That gives you something different to what you did before. Rather than just an index page, it gives you a time series based index, which ultimately allows you to deliver value quicker.
That's a really interesting one too, like the shift from static thinking to like time-based and more broadly applicable. Do we have any stories of the glue people at orgs getting that and being able to be more powerful with it or being able to move mountains with it?
Yes, within just a few hours, we got 70 people aligned on what they're going to do for the next 3 months. And the number of, because it's a large enterprise, there's only actually 4 or 5 different outcomes that they were that they would be able to achieve in that time. And the complexity that's involved in all the different modules required meant that team A has to do one screen, team B has to do another screen, this team has to do this backend service, that other team has to do that backend service. And a lot of the work that the glue people do is understand that instinctively and then just try and rally people to get it all done. But they're doing that on the fly. They're doing that throughout the process. So let's say you have a 3-month plan. You say this is what we want to achieve, and then you go back and the glue people are responsible for trying to piece that together and trying to make sure that it works so that you can hit the target. And so they're doing it in the static form, but also with this sort of instinct that we need to do A, B, and C so that we can get to the outcome. And so you're leaving it to their instinct to do that. What we've done recently with this, just a few hours of getting the right people in the room, it changes that because you're now, when you do it on a time sequence basis, it shifts that whole thinking forward. So instead of saying, I'm going to improvise the time-based sequencing aspect because nobody ever thought to do it on a time-based approach, if you now do that ahead of time at the beginning, it unlocks speedier progress. And so that was the aha moment. It's like, oh, wow, now we all know actually what we're doing and who's responsible for what and what the dependency map between everybody is. And you're doing that much, much earlier. There are already practices that try to do this. Like, we're not the first with NDD. There's user story mapping tries to do exactly the same thing. It's a bit more of a manual process. I can talk about how this compares to it, but this NDD takes a lot of the amazing things that came from user story mapping and employs them actually, which is also a time-based modeling approach. So is event storming, by the way.
Yeah, and it allows for a lot more of the concurrent working elements too, which unlocks a lot of people and a lot of teams.
Exactly.